Welcome to the special Halloween edition of Noir Alley. I'm Eddie Muller, film noir's answer to Svengoolie. I have a special treat for you today, something we've never done before on Noir Alley, but is entirely appropriate for a program featuring films from the 40s and 50s. We're showing a double bill. Two films from RKO Pictures, Cat People, a trend-setting B-movie from 1942, and The Leopard Man, released the following year. Both movies are the work of the producing-directing team of Val Lewton and Jacques Tourneur, artists who brought an unexpected level of sophistication to what the studios expected to be monster movies. In 1942, RKO was in financial straits following the commercial failure of two expensive Orson Welles productions, Citizen Kane and The Magnificent Ambersons. Seeking to replenish the coffers, RKO chief Charles Corner decided the studio should produce a string of horror movies to emulate the success Universal had had with films like Frankenstein, The Wolfman, and The Mummy. Writer Val Lewton, who'd been a valued confidant to producer David O. Selznick, was hired to create the studio's horror film unit. The only rules was that Corner would supply the titles. The films couldn't be longer than 75 minutes, and they couldn't cost more than $150,000 to make. Lewton immediately brought in two talents he'd worked with under Selznick, Jacques Tourneur and writer DeWitt Bodine. Together, this trio fashioned a film from only two words, Cat People. Whereas Universal horror films were set in far-flung locations like Switzerland, Transylvania, and Egypt, Lewton decided to transpose an old-world folktale to modern-day New York, bringing the supernatural terror closer to home. He wanted to see what would happen when superstition ran head-on into contemporary science and psychology. To that end, Lewton and his team did something that subverted the monster movie template on which Corner aimed to capitalize. They wouldn't show the monster. Instead, they'd enwrap the audience in an ever-escalating sense of dread, punctuated by startling shocks, but they'd never let the audience see an actual cat person. This is why I think of Lewton's films as hybrids of horror and noir. They're films of psychological suspense more than they are horror films or monster movies. In this film, a young woman fears she's descended from an ancient Serbian tribe whom folklore claimed became feral beasts when sexually aroused. Yes, that is the premise of the movie, something the production code would only allow in a cheesy horror show. Of course, the film can also be interpreted as an archly symbolic treatment of a sexual disorder that leads to lethal jealousy. The way Lewton made pictures, audiences could experience it whichever way they wanted. Lewton, Tourneur, and Bodine all contributed to the script, which in itself was a rarity for a B movie. Once they conceived of an approach in which less is more, two other essential members of the unit were added, editor Mark Robeson and cinematographer Nicholas Musaraka, both RKO veterans. The camera work and editing in Cat People would prove influential, for it showed that the power of suggestion, in the right hands, was scarier than any monster. Instead of a Karloff or Lugosi bringing the chills, Lewton cast baby-faced French actress Simone Simon, contrasting her European mystique with a couple of all-American types, Kent Smith and Jane Randolph. RKO executives initially hated Lewton's approach, and the studio feared it had made a grave miscalculation by granting him so much autonomy. But the film caught fire with audiences who were spellbound by this fresh handling of provocative material. It ended up being RKO's biggest grossing movie of 1942, and it set Lewton up to make a series of films that would revolutionize the horror genre and add new elements to the language of movie making. From 1942, here is producer Val Lewton's initial foray into the cinema of fear, Cat People.